Good morning. Today is a beautiful, beautiful Wednesday. I'm in my outdoor office with a second cup of coffee. This is, of course, for us as Christians, Holy Week. During this week, we are essentially following Jesus from his entry into Jerusalem on what we call Palm Sunday through to ultimately his betrayal, arrest, and crucifixion, and then subsequent resurrection on Easter. This is a week that is, you cannot overstate how important it is for us. Over the last, month or so, on Wednesdays, I've been talking about different theological questions. And somebody asked me this several weeks ago, and I've been holding it for this week. And it's this: why crucifixion? Why crucifixion? Why was it? Did it have to be a cross, a crucifixion? Could it have been another form of execution? And I'm going to try to wade into that a little bit. And it's a great question. It is a great question. Why crucifixion? Could it have been another form of execution? Taking it as a given that in order to atone for our sins that Jesus had to die, I'm taking that as a given. Would another form of execution? Why not? So it is a question that has several different answers. We need to come at it from several different ways. First, it is crucifixion was capital punishment. Execution was fairly common in Rome. Most industrialized countries now either don't have capital punishment or use it fairly sparingly. In the U.S., there are a number of states that still have capital punishment, but it's not something that is carried out commonly, and courts are all the time going to great lengths to make certain that it's done in, a humane way. And in North Carolina, just out of curiosity, I looked this up. Capital punishment is legal, but it hasn't been. The last person executed in North Carolina was in 2006, so it's been a long time. But not so with ancient Rome. Ancient Rome didn't have a civil police force as such. Capital punishments or punishments of any sort were commonly handed down by the head of a family or simply by whatever military garrison was nearby. And unlike modern societies, particularly modern Western societies, they had no qualms at all about cruel and inhumane punishments. And you could really argue that they went out of their way to make punishments inhumane and cruel. So, to answer the question, why crucifixion? The first is this. In a sense, crucifixion is a fulfillment of Old Testament. You read Psalm 22. You read through Psalm 22, and it is without calling it, without saying crucifixion, when you read the psalm, it is obvious that someone being crucified is being described, which is remarkable because ancient Judaism didn't practice crucifixion. It is a remarkable picture of crucifixion, even though ancient Judaism didn't practice it. Now, that came along a little later. So when Jesus is crucified, that is an act that is prefigured by Psalm 22. And in fact, when Jesus is on the cross, he quotes that psalm, my God, why have you forsaken me? Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani in Hebrew. So first, it is in a sense in fulfillment of Old Testament. The second thing is this. There were any number of different forms of execution that the ancient Romans practiced. And most of them to us would be barbaric. Just barbaric. And I'm not even go into the details of them here. But most of the Roman forms of execution were barbaric. And crucifixion seems to have been what they regarded as the worst. When I read some of the others, and I say, man, they sound just as bad too to me. But they seem to have regarded crucifixion as the worst, and crucifixion seems to have been reserved for a particular sort of criminal. Crucifixion was not used for any garden variety crime. It was reserved for traitors, deserters, slaves who had committed some offense. It was used on foreigners. But it was reserved for what they regarded as being particularly heinous crimes against the state. Like, again, traitors and deserters, slaves who revolted, they were all crucified. It is interesting that under Roman law, it was illegal to crucify a Roman citizen. And two of the great, Christian leaders of the first century, Peter and Paul, bear that out. The Apostle Paul, when he was executed, according to tradition at least, was executed by beheading. He was a Roman citizen, and hence it was illegal to crucify him. Peter was crucified, and upside down at that. He was not a Roman citizen. So crucifixion was what they regarded as being the most humiliating, the worst of their forms of capital punishment. We have this English word excruciating, and that actually comes from a Latin phrase, out of the cross. So when we say something is excruciating, we are quite literally referring to crucifixion. We quite literally referring to crucifixion. Now the third way we get the answer to this question, why a cross, gets to the level of meaning. And the meaning is where the New Testament writers major when it comes to Jesus' death. And they don't tell us anything about the details of the cross or of the crucifixion. There were some variations to how crucifixion was carried out. variations to what a cross might have looked like, but they didn't major on that. They majored on the meaning. So all four gospel writers agree that Jesus was crucified. And the cross, the crucifixion, was the centerpiece of early Christian preaching. The Apostle Paul said this, "I resolve to know nothing but Christ and Him crucified." You read through the book of Acts, and like every sermon is, Jesus was crucified and rose from the dead. Jesus was crucified and rose from the dead. And you could do a whole lot worse than that as the bedrock for any sermon preached at any point. Jesus was crucified for our sins, and He rose from the dead. Galatians, picking up from something in Deuteronomy, cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree. Paul said that the cross was a stumbling block to Gentiles and an offense to the Jews, to paraphrase. So the third answer gets to the level of meaning. If you think about atonement, Jesus goes to atone for our sins. He goes to atone for our sins. He takes all of our sins upon Himself. And so at the level of atonement, Jesus takes the worst, that what the Romans regarded as their worst. He takes the worst of it. And crucifixion was particularly humiliating and shameful. You're publicly exposed and left to hang. He takes that, and that is, the crucifixion is a more shameful and a more humiliating form of execution than others. So think about that in relation to the atonement. He takes our humiliation, our shame. He takes the very worst that Rome could offer. He takes the very worst of humanity upon Himself. And all of the things we don't like to admit to ourselves. All of the things we don't like to admit to ourselves, the things that we wish we could change about ourselves, about our natures. He takes all of them. Whatever guilt we have, whatever guilt we may feel, whatever shame we may feel for a past offense, whether it's real or imagined, all of that He takes upon Himself. All of that He takes upon Himself. And we have confidence because we know that whatever we experience, whatever we may experience, whatever we may go through, Jesus has been there. Jesus took the worst of that the Roman Empire had, and more importantly, He took the very worst of hell and death. He took the very worst. Doing it for us. Doing it as an atoning sacrifice for us. And because of that, we have confidence wherever we are, whatever we experience, Christ is there with us, and Christ understands. And to me, that is some powerful, powerful good news on Wednesday of Holy Week. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of Holy Week.